Hi, you're watching a very special session of Agenda AWANI because for the 5th year in a row, Agenda AWANI was at the World Economic Forum Davos. This year, the theme is about stakeholder capitalism, which means we don't look so much at shareholder capitalism, corporate profit, PATAMI, EBITDA, whatever, but we also include the cost to the environment, the cost to people. And funnily enough, even though Malaysian contingent was one of the smallest ever at the World Economic Forum in Davos this year, but the topic of Malaysia and palm oil, because our leaders were supposed to meet in Davos to talk about palm oil and import and export and all that. So I was right in the middle of that. So now it gives me great pleasure to link where do we really stand as far as sustainability, because my perception, 99% of all the discourse in Davos this year had been about sustainability, and it's good that Malaysia and palm oil was also mentioned at the World Economic Forum. So it gives me a leverage to come back here and really sift through all this noise and look at the facts. So the best person to chat with us about the sustainability factor of palm oil is Saudara Mohd Haris Mohd Arshad. Thank you so much for making time. You're the managing director of Sime Darby Oils, and you can see the oil in front. And yes, if you haven't known that brand, then if you believe for the next 24 minutes of the facts being presented here, then you can make your own decision. But I'm just going to start with the elephant in the room. How sustainable are products like that or any other product from Malaysia as far as palm oil is concerned? Because if I'm a teenager like Greta Thunberg sitting there in Northern Europe Googling, I might find a video of an orangutan dying because of palm oil plantation, for example.
Right.
So that's the context I want to give you, because like I said, at the World Economic Forum in January, sustainability and even palm oil was mentioned.
Right. Well, thanks, Kamarul, for inviting me here. It's a real pleasure. The topic of sustainability is at the heart of what we do in the palm oil industry. And to some extent, palm oil has been a victim of its own success. What I mean by that is that we've seen tremendous growth in supply, driven by the fact that it has been a fairly profitable industry.
Yep.
And we saw proliferation started in Malaysia initially and then went on into Indonesia. I think the tipping point happened when we start to see a lot of forests being cleared, particularly with our neighbors, and the concern around the loss of biodiversity.
Yes.
And the RSPO was formed quite some time ago to basically manage this issue around sustainability. And in fact, Sime Darby was one of the founding members of RSPO. So to your question, how sustainable is palm oil? That perhaps I can try to answer that by saying, depending on who you ask, right? Now, if you look at Malaysia, I believe wholeheartedly that our operation, not just Sime, but our colleagues as well as smallholders, can be deemed to be sustainable in a sense that we no longer do forest clearing. We respect the fact that there's no peat planting, and we make sure that all of our employees and workers in the estate are being looked after. And these are one of the key points that we talk about when we talk about sustainability, that forests are protected, no exploitation of employees, and that we don't plant in peat.
Yes.
Are we clearing any more forests? No. So what do we do then? Then we have to figure about how do we actually improve our yield, given that we're not having any more land to open. So in the context of Malaysia, I do believe that we are following sustainability practices.
When we talk about sustainability, when I say talk, in the old days when I was young, it's people to people, mainstream media, but now the chatter happens a lot online and digitally. So it's also a perception game. So a lot of the focus seems to be on the eastern side of Malaysia, in the Borneo side. And do you think that one of the ways at least, because to be fair, coming from where you are, you can look and request for any facts based on what Sime Darby does in this respect of palm oil, and you can get the data. But for people outside there, the grassroots especially, they might not have the purview, and they're not privy to such information. So how do you see the perception game and the real facts around? Because sometimes I get the feeling like you're like that, coronavirus researcher in a super sophisticated lab somewhere, and people are saying everything and anything about coronavirus when you have been looking and being friends in that sense with the virus since maybe 20 years ago, since you started your career. But because you started out not with Sime Darby, you've been around the multinationals, you've been with Nestle. My first interview with the chairman of Nestle, that was about 7 to 8 years ago. Everyone else was talking about energy. He was talking about water. Mm-hmm. And I know that in your track record, you have always been allied with companies that the central theme has always been about sustainability. Mm-hmm. But I would like to ask your wisdom to benchmark that to the perception out there, because sometimes it's just ridiculous things that people believe about palm oil.
Yeah, well, the fact is, if you Google palm oil, the first thing you'll see images about forests being destroyed, orangutan being displaced, and so on. Perception is reality, unfortunately. And you are absolutely right, Kamarul. It is about how do you fight that perception. We've tried many angles. We've tried fighting it with facts, saying that we have so much of palm oil being certified as sustainable. We've talked about how efficient palm oil is in terms of yield per hectare versus soya, and we talk about the versatility of palm oil. Mm-hmm. But what we're not being successful in attempting thus far is about fighting the battle of the hearts. Okay. So in other words, how do you conjure an image which actually shows palm oil to be sustainable in a way that it helps nation progress? It helps elevating people from poverty, putting children to school, and so on and so forth. That has been a very difficult task, given that it's easy for people to show image of biodiversity loss. And if you compare that to nation progressing, that probably catches the heart more than countries like Malaysia progressing because of palm oil. So I think we've lost that battle of perception. However, how do we win it? So this is where making the products available, showing that you can actually bring sustainable palm oil to the market, is a good starting point. And I honestly believe that palm oil actually is a good force for sustainable development. Yeah. We can prove that when we talk about sustainable development, oil palm cultivation and how you produce it, you bring it to market, is sustainable when you compare it to other crops. So it is about making sure that the product is available in the marketplace. So the challenge that I face, or that we face in the industry, is how do consumers who want it actually get hold of it? The supply chain of palm oil, Kamarul, unfortunately, is very convoluted. Producers in Malaysia or in Indonesia who are sustainable may not be able to get their products from Malaysia and Indonesia to the customers who want it because of the complexity in moving it from origin to destination. And that has been what we've been trying to do, because we are trying to prove to the world that you can bring sustainable palm oil to the markets that want it. And Alifia, for example, is the only palm oil in Malaysia today that has been certified as RSPO sustainable certified. Right? And you can look at the bottle, the certification there. But the point here is that it's there. The challenge is how you bring it. Because if you bring the products to the market, then you can talk about the efforts that we've made, the things that we do on the ground, and the impact that we actually have made to people that actually work on the sector.
I want to go there. It's easy to convince people, maybe relatively, in Southeast Asia about the sustainability of palm oil. But when you go to where we are not as strong, like in Europe, but they have destroyed their forests like 100 over years ago. But now they're telling us that you are destroying your forest and the flora and fauna in it, hence we do not want your product. I was right at the beginning reporting on RSPO. Personally, I had invested hope in it, but the moment when Indonesia and Malaysia can't really get our act together, of course I'm simplifying it, but that's the way I saw it happening. So now it's everyone for himself almost. So if Sime Darby is true end-to-end on the supply chain that is certified to be sustainable, with the EU decision, how do you still want to look at the European Union market? I mean, let's be practical. This is new Malaysia anyway. Problems are plenty, never end. But if we can solve one at a time,
Yeah.
how do we solve this issue in Europe about palm oil?
Okay. I think, to be fair to the EU and to the European intelligent consumers, they have moved beyond boycott. So they are not necessarily talking about let's not have palm oil in our food at all.
Okay.
But what they're saying is we want to have sustainable palm oil on our table. We want to have access to that. The consumption of soybean oil, the consumption of palm oil in Europe has been fairly flat.
Okay.
Over the last 10 years, it hasn't really grown. But if you look at the composition of that consumption, more and more palm oil are now being used for biodiesel, for energy, and less so in food because they have moved away from palm where they can, and what we are now left with are what I call a core demand.
Okay.
And we as Sime Darby actually are involved a lot in supplying that core demand. So what the EU is saying is we're going to cap the amount of palm being used for biodiesel based on this year's use, and in the year 2030 it's going to be phased out.
Okay.
But the governments of Malaysia and Indonesia are already responding to that, to the B20 in Malaysia, B30 in Indonesia, to spur biodiesel demand, to potentially counter the decline in Europe. But if you take away biodiesel and you look at food, the truth is you cannot formulate palm oil out from the products that we find in Europe or anywhere else in the world for that matter, because of the versatility of palm oil.
Okay.
If you want to produce margarine cost competitively, you have to use palm oil.
Okay.
If you want to produce shampoo sustainably, you have to use palm oil. So given the fact that you need this product, therefore the choice is I want sustainable palm as opposed to conventional one. So that is the real challenge. How do they get access to sustainable palm in the most cost competitive manner? So it's not about boycotting, it's about making sure that I have the right palm oil in my products so that I can sell to the informed customers
You're
in the
good
market.
with numbers. Give us where can we replace the amount of tons we're going to lose in EU, for example, with other things that we've discussed about. Paint us the scenario from that quantity perspective.
Okay. So let's say we're talking about 7 million tons of palm being exported into Europe.
Okay.
And of that, about 60% is actually used for fuel, and 40% is used for food. Now, if you imagine that you lose that 60%, right, so you're talking about 4.2 million tons roughly of palm oil in Europe, where can that be used? Now, this is where you got to get hats off to the Indonesian government, because they have been very proactive in trying to use that oil that potentially could be lost in the country. Now, unlike Malaysia, Indonesia has import expenditure of energy, of petroleum, right? So they're actually a net importer now. So their thinking is rather than importing petroleum, I'd rather use palm. And it's a mechanism for them to actually subsidize that in a way, right? So a bit of a different setting between Malaysia and Indonesia, but Indonesia has taken that step to actually counter that potential loss. And Malaysia, in a lot of extent, have done that. So if you look at biodiesel mandate, we started off with 5%, and now we've gone up to 7%, then to 10%, and very soon it'll be 20%. And what's encouraging, though, is the petcos in Malaysia are now starting to realize that biodiesel is here to stay, and now starting to reach out. So what can we do? How can we participate in the economy as well?
Hi, you're still watching a very special session of Agenda AWANI, and sometimes I feel very lonely at the World Economic Forum Davos. This year was the 5th year that ASTRO AWANI is there. We're the only accredited Malaysian media, not many Southeast Asian media even there. But when the issue of palm oil came up there, so I cannot help but feel that I have to fly that Malaysian flag. So I'm very glad I can come back here and connect what was discussed at the Alps, down back to the hot weather that we have here. And I want to move on from the EU and the controversy about palm oil to, okay, what is done, but moving forward, the whole mood of the world is going towards sustainability and better health and everything. So I've been following since the day one I became a journalist about palm oil, and I've sat down in many instances and I've verified that by going to check and verify with our experts in the universities. The scientific properties of palm oil is almost like God sent compared to many others like soybean or whatever it is. So why can't we start a palm oil 4.0 where, okay, you can be haters if you want, but I'm going to build, develop, and give out as yield most good stuff from palm oil. So can that be a new thinking moving forward? Because that's what New Malaysia wants anyway.
Indeed.
We no longer want to sell commodities.
Yeah.
We want to sell high value, upmarket products. Let's do that for palm oil. I know people think of flying cars more as a high value added product, but palm oil can be a high value added product.
Yeah. Well, I think you hit the nail on the coffin there, so to speak. The fact is, palm oil comes from the palm family, right? So you have date, which is a palm family.
Yes.
You have coconut, which is a palm family. Whereas some of the other oils are actually, they come from the soya, which is
like
actually
nuts
a
kind of thing.
nuts family, right? Different properties. All this while, palm is seen as the cheapest source of oils and fats.
Yeah.
Because it's very efficient. You
Yes.
take the fruits, you extract the oil, and off you go. So we have been trying to what I call solving the oil challenge.
All right.
So you have the palm fruit, you extract the living daylight out of it, and you get, 22-23% oil,
Yes.
and then you throw the rest. But if you study the oil palm itself, you'll realize, why is it color orange or
Okay.
reddish color?
Like
Because-
golden kind of thing.
Absolutely, because of beta-carotene. Where do you find beta-carotene? You find them in carrots.
Yes.
We eat carrots, but we
Correct.
throw away that color.
Yes.
Because in the refining process, we bleach it. So we took the color out so that it becomes like soybean oil.
Yes.
You're throwing away beta-carotene. So that's a very healthy, nutritious
Yes.
minerals, right?
So
or
we're not
products.
clever in that sense.
Yeah, so we throw
Even
that
as
away.
consumers, right? We want the better looking
Yeah,
one,
you
but
want
that's
it to
not the
look-
better looking
you
one.
want it to look clear.
Yes.
But you're throwing away a very nutritious product, which is beta-carotene. So it has that. It has phenolics. Now, phenolics is a very strong antioxidant. It has vitamin E tocotrienol, as opposed to tocopherol, which you find in soybean. Now, tocotrienol is 40 to 60% more potent. Now, these are antioxidants which can help to reduce free radicals in our body, and therefore could potentially fight against cancer. So when we try to solve for oil, we extract all this oil out from the nut or from the fruit, and then we throw away everything. We throw away the rest. So our challenge now, our thinking in Sime Darby oil is, what if one day we can say to the world that the oil is the byproduct. The main product is coming from all the nutrients that we are extracting it out. Now, is there a process to do that? So today the answer is we don't know, but we are trying to look at the fact that we can monetize more on that, what today is called as the side stream, and turn that into a mainstream product.
Okay.
And that potentially the oil can be a byproduct. Different thinking, but I think that's a 4.0 that you were referring to, Kamarul.
How do you convince stakeholders, especially from a business perspective, before we even go to consumers, for that alternative to become mainstream? It needs to be resourced, it cannot be done overnight, you need to have a clear medium to long-term plan, yada, yada, yada. And of course, if the public investors are concerned, they want to see returns and yields to their investment.
Right.
So, being the MD, I'm sure you have to play that game too.
Oh, absolutely.
So how do you play this game? Because the science is clear, but the business side is still up for grabs.
Correct. So we need to balance that. I mean, the reality is, at the end of the day, I still have to deliver profit to the company, and shareholders are demanding it. So that's what I call the business as usual. So right here, today, my business as usual is I have to run my refineries full. Globally, I've got about 3.8 million tons of refining capacity across 7 countries. That needs to generate the cash. Now, that is the business of today. That is our exploit, if you like. But what got us here today may not get us there in the future.
Yes.
And we strongly believe that the future for palm oil downstream lies in the high value-added products. Now that is a long play. That's a long game that we're playing, right? 15, 20, 30 years. But you have to start that today. Whilst the business as usual will generate us the cash, which you can then take part of that to invest in these new businesses.
Okay. Some people, in fact many people that I've met and interviewed, even corporate captains, are very wary about the disruptions of technology. That's why it's called the fourth industrial revolution, and the term disruption automatically comes with it. We've seen in this country, the media industry, you can see it for yourself, but in your side of the woods, if I can phrase it that way, we haven't really seen a huge leap of disruption and you know, bridging the disruption. So if you were to disrupt yourself first by doing this, by changing some Darby oils maybe in the future from just an oil play into a pharmaceutical play, for example, because health is a big concern, and the statistics prove that people suffering more from cancer, and free radicals are one of the main perpetrators that people are looking at for health. And if you can move it there, wouldn't the technological disruption be your ally rather than your enemy? Because with big data, transparency of sustainability can be at a push of a button on my phone. I can see, okay, this is all the acreage in Borneo and there's no burning, for example, and I can push another button and it will show me exactly 940 milligram per kilogram of palm oil of stuff like tocotrienols. So aren't you in the best position, because it's not really a green field that people are looking at. At the same time, the more advanced the technology is going to be, it's only going to help you make that alternative mainstream rather than otherwise.
No, absolutely. I think the time is right. The cost of new product development today has gone down tremendously, primarily because we don't need to do this ourselves. We can actually go out to third-party labs, independent labs all over the world that can help us to solve this problem. Part of the problem why we are where we are today is because if you look at the profit map of the oil palm industry has predominantly been in upstream.
Okay.
So I plant the tree, I harvest the fruits, I produce crude palm oil, I sell it to somebody else, and I make that money. So plantation companies have been sort of on that business model. So I only going to produce CPO or crude palm, somebody else will take it. But what has happened over the last few years is the price of commodities have gone down. That has an impact on us as a plantation company. So the time is now for us to focus on downstream. But just going to downstream itself doesn't make sense, because we know for a fact that there's a lot of value in the fruit itself. So we have the fruits, we know how to plant it, we know how the characters of the fruits. Now it's about getting someone to work with us to figure out how we can extract all of that.
In the spirit of New Malaysia and the spirit of the World Economic Forum Davos, for the first time, the World Economic Forum brought 10 teenagers, top 10 teenagers of the world, as they like to label it. One was Greta Thunberg, but I met the rest, and they're even more impressive for me than Greta Thunberg. So how are you going to sell this to the younger Malaysians and people across Southeast Asia, where palm oil is part of our surroundings, that this is their fight? Because we are not going to be able to plant more acreage. It might be even lesser acreage, but higher yield.
That's right.
And higher yield is not just for cooking, but if we can skip that cooking part and straight away make our body healthy, for example, so that's the way to go. So I'm going to steal the last 1 minute for you to convince, because even now, if you're 18 in Malaysia, you can vote and stand up as a YB candidate. So would you bring this kind of fight? Because rather than look at oil and the palm trees, we look at beta or alpha or tocotrienols, and this is the new fight. So I'm going to let you make that pitch.
Okay, so the fight is about climate change, and climate change is real. We are seeing it happening even in our own operation. So we need to address that. And the way to address that is to ensure that all of our practices today are sustainable, that we're not clearing any more forests and so forth. But that for us is the table stake. Now, if you agree for a minute that there is sustainable palm oil, the question now is, what else do we do with this palm oil? Now, what if I tell you that palm oil is something that can be used to fight cancer? Palm oil that can be used to actually move from being a meat-based diet into a vegan-based diet. palm oil can be used to actually produce vitamins. That's far more potent than what you have available today. Now that will improve our livelihood while at the same time managing this climate change issue that we face. How does that make you feel? Right? It certainly makes me feel motivated to be in this business.
For you to believe in, not just to find a job or to create wealth, but something that really help people.
As I said,
so
it can be a positive change. Absolutely.
So I would like to end with that. Thank you so much,
Thank
Saudara
you.
Mohd Haris. Good night and goodbye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.